Deputy Butler.
Gorv Mahagut Laskin Corla, and thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan, for sharing your time with me. The effect of this bill will be to allow an Irish resident who was sentenced to a period of probation for an offence committed while temporarily in another member state to return home and be supervised by the Irish Probation Service. It will allow a resident of another member state who commits an offence in Ireland for which he or she receives a sentence of probation to return to his or her country of residence under the supervision of the probation services in the state. The current situation when an offender is sentenced to a period of probation in another jurisdiction, in any other member state outside of Ireland, means that the offender is away from family and friends and has no pathway which allows them to be transferred home. And I suppose when I looked at this bill today and decided what would I say, my first thought was actually for the parents. And in some instances, there can be very elderly parents that have children that have done wrong. They have been sentenced, they are serving their crime, but they have the opportunity to avail of probation. But because they're not able to come back to their own country, it makes life extremely difficult. It's very, very difficult, especially if the parents are elderly. And the last thing you want elderly parents worrying about if they're not well is, if their son or daughter is in another country, how are they surviving? What will happen when they do eventually get the opportunity to come home? And it would make life much easier on a number of levels if the offender was able to come back to their own area to remain under the supervision of probation officers in their own country for the duration and the remainder of their sentence. And there's no one stating that they're not, they have to serve their sentence. There is no doubt about that. And if they were lucky enough to receive probation, that they adhere to the terms and conditions. But, when you stop and think of, it could be anyone's brother or sister, it could be anyone's niece or nephew, it's a very, very difficult situation, especially, I believe, for parents who have brought up their child with the best of intentions, want them to do well in the world. They may not have had that opportunity to do well, and they won't go down the wrong path. And it must be an awful worry every night thinking of, will I ever get the opportunity to bring my son or daughter back home to live their life? It would serve as a better means for rehabilitation and integrating back into the community, which is best achieved with the support of a family network and support services here. The bill would also allow the state to provide the necessary support in a practical and legislative way to Irish citizens who find themselves sentenced to a period of probation in another member state, while also allowing the state to impose sanctions, if and where necessary, on the offender. But it would be done in their own home state. At the moment, the arrangement in place could have a detrimental effect on the mental health and the emotional well-being both of the person who offends and of that of their families, who must feel powerless and frustrated at not having their loved one closer. The effects of this bill will be positive, and I am happy to stand here tonight and to support it for the offender, their family, their friends, the wider community, and of course the participating member state. It allows for a better outcome that will have a more lasting and positive effect on all members of our society. It is disappointing that it has taken almost a decade to complete the process, and the failure to implement the framework decision has also drawn criticism from the judiciary, as my colleague has said. In the Minister for Justice and Equality versus Teelan, the High Court considered an extradition request in which the respondent argued that the failure by the state to implement the framework decision provided grounds for refusing to order his surrender to the UK. The respondent was convicted of stabbing an individual with the head of a screwdriver, causing a puncture wound to the victim's head. He was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. The respondent was aged 17 at the time of the offence and was in the UK for a brief holiday. Having served 3 years of his imprisonment, he was initially released on licence in 2013. As a condition of his release on licence, he resided at a probation hostel, but the respondent did not have any connection to the UK and found it difficult to live with strangers away from his family and friends. And I suppose the impact of the Teelan case was it provides a practical example of the type of circumstances where, once implemented, the framework decision will be of benefit to offenders by providing further rehabilitation and reintegration into society. It also demonstrates the harm caused by the failure to implement the framework decision. Fianna Fáil supports increased opportunities for social reintegration by allowing offenders probation measures which have been imposed to be supervised in the country in which they live. And I hope that this bill will become law very, very soon. Gorv Mahagod.